Good stuff. That's the Beatles with Revolution. Take a rest, guys. Hello, this is the second installment of In Case You Missed It for Unit 3, and we're starting with You Say You Want a Revolution by the Beatles, because the first big topic here to talk about is the Glorious Revolution. So if you're following along on your study guide, ladies and gentlemen, we're on page 3. Right at the top, we left off talking about absolutism in Eastern Europe and how absolutism was used as an effective tool to run a society. Didn't work everywhere, though. As we talked about at the end of the last video, Poland is an example of a place where absolutism didn't work particularly well and led to the dissolution of Poland later in our unit. On the study guide, let's follow along here. Charles II, sometimes called the Merry Monarch, because his arrival was greeted with such happiness. Happy! Okay, restored England's throne in 1660, worried Parliament because of his favoritism toward Catholicism, dismissed Parliament in 1681 because Parliament refused to recognize the right of his brother, James I, to take the throne. To what extent were these the same problems Parliament had during the reign of Charles II's father, Charles I? It's the same issues. Okay, whether or not the Parliament should meet, whether or not the government should be able to control the people without any reign in on it, whether or not an absolutist monarch should be able to do that particularly, and should we move more towards the Catholicism favored by the Stuarts or towards the more puritanical ideas favored by the Parliament? That's the issue. Why did Parliament choose to remove James II from power, and how did they gloriously do it? They removed him from power because later on in life, near what people would have thought was near the end, James fathered a child. Oh no, he didn't. Yes, he did. Prior to that, James had two daughters, both Protestants. In 1685, he fathered a son who he pledged would be a Catholic. The members of Parliament, realizing that that meant that the young boy would have a full, long life leading England as a Catholic, knew that they had to go somewhere else. They went to James's oldest daughter, Mary, and Mary was married to William of Orange, a stadtholder in the Netherlands. The marriage of the two of them was a huge Protestant marriage. They were considered to be very stable, and Parliament offered them the throne. Now, that's a key point. They offered it to them. They, in essence, said, you can have it, but here's what you have to do. The English Bill of Rights, that's our next question. You have to agree to allow the Parliament to meet every 3 years. You have to agree that the Parliament rules jointly with the King. You also have to agree that Parliament will have the power of the purse and cannot be dismissed. The monarch may not keep a standing army in a time of peace. The rights of the press and speech must be also upheld. In other words, they wanted a written constitution of ideas. That's why this is a glorious revolution. It happens nearly bloodlessly. James II is chased away with only a little bit of a problem in Northern Ireland. Writing at this time, John Locke. And you know why I'm saying it that way. Shout out to my boy Paul Wolverton, teaching at Kau High School. Inspired me to become a history teacher. Well done, sir. Try and stop smoking if you can, though. Okay. Discuss the major ideas proposed by John Locke. Locke believed that human beings had rights, and these natural rights to life, liberty, and property were ingrained in you when you were born. There was nothing that could be done to take them away from you. A government's job was to defend these rights. If you as an individual consented to be governed, and that's an important phrase, consented to be governed, then you, in essence, were saying that the government had the right to protect those rights, not to take them from you. If, on the other hand, that government stopped protecting those rights and you no longer consented to be governed, you had the right to remove that government and replace it with a government that did function in the proper fashion. That's a revolutionary idea. Up until now, we've spoken of the fact that power emanates from above. It emanates from God, from a system of the universe which is handed down to us for centuries, that power is installed upon a monarch and that monarch has the right to rule. Locke is saying it's the other way. The power doesn't come from above, it comes from below. It's the people who consent to be governed. They give the governing agency, whether that's an individual or a democracy, they give the governing agency the ability to govern them. If they don't want to be governed, they cannot be forced to be governed. It's their right to remove that government. Moving down. Political and economic motives encouraged Charles II and Louis XIV to begin Royal Academies of Science. Now, these two hung out quite a bit when they were younger. Remember that Charles II, the son of Charles I, had escaped from England after his father's demise and had lived at court with Louis XIV. So they grew up together. They had similar ideas in that sense. Both formed Royal Academies of Science for political purposes so that they are able to perhaps make their reign stronger as individuals. If they can harness the power of science to perhaps give them more powerful weapons, better roads, any of these things are going to make an absolutist more absolute. From an economic standpoint, you'd have the same advantages. If you could invent something that people had to buy, or if you could invent faster ships, more powerful weapons, it gave you the ability to use those things to dominate trade and to make yourself a stronger monarch. Flipping the page. What factors contributed to the decline of the Dutch Republic as a major European trading power? Funny you should ask. Those two guys we just mentioned, Charles II and Louis XIV, were in cahoots. Louis XIV paid Charles to go to war against the Dutch and strip them of their naval power. As we talked about in the DBQ that we wrote, the Dutch really started to come apart, not just externally because of the war, but also internally. There was a lot of squabbling because the wealthiest of the provinces, Holland, where Amsterdam was, seemed to be footing most of the cost for the war, and they were against the idea that the other provinces didn't have to. You also saw a bit of a change. These were people who used to be very strong, simple, Calvinist people, and now they're getting a little showy, a little bit famous. You know, they've left behind the Hannah Montana and gone with the Miley Cyrus. We all know where that goes. Nowhere good. Okay? Moving down the page, central beliefs of the Enlightenment, that we are reasonable, logical, scientific human beings, that we should use our faculties in order to discover more about ourselves and the universe and the world around us. It's an optimistic movement in the sense that it believes that human beings can figure out the ultimate recipe for life and then can use that recipe in order to assure that people live good, strong, happy lives. Locke and Newton are seen as the forerunners of the movement. We talked about Newton in our last unit with his discoveries in science, but Locke in particular here on a couple of ideas. Number one, the right of individuals to be governed by their own consent. We talked about that in this video earlier, but also this notion of a tabula rasa, that human beings come into the world blank. They're written on by their environments and by their experiences, and that's what really dictates human nature. We as individuals aren't necessarily programmed to be one way or another. It's what happens to us that shapes us as individuals. Philosophe is French, generally speaking, but could be from some other places. But the Enlightenment really does thrive in France during its high point of 1700 to 1750. Philosophes were individuals who had huge ideas. Okay, they would sit around and discuss, and they were big movers of the Enlightenment. I don't know what you drew on your study guide, but I hope it was good. It says the area is blank for drawing. Go at it. Okay, let's talk about some of these Enlightenment all-stars. Montesquieu. What do you remember from Montesquieu? Separation of powers, and in the Persian letters, tolerance of others. Two big ideas there. Voltaire, against organized religion because he believes it corrupts individuals and can be used to corrupt societies. Voltaire's in love with the English government system because he thinks their sense of tolerance makes for a better society. Diderot, he made an encyclopedia of all of the other ideas, put them together, and is really the crowning individual in that way from a publishing standpoint of the Enlightenment. Adam Smith, the notion that human beings have economic functioning programmed into them. You don't have to teach us how to bargain for better prices or for higher wages. You don't even have to teach a child that. They know that. They're going to want 2 cookies, not 1 cookie. That's how kids work. Okay? Smith said that governments, therefore, didn't need to get in the way. The system of mercantilism was obtrusive, in essence, because the tariffs and the sponsoring of businesses, that got in the way of human activity. So governments should step back and allow a system of capitalism where individuals dominate the marketplace to rule. Rousseau gives us a couple of big ideas. Number one, the notion of raising children in his book Emile. It's based on this idea of letting a child be a child and letting them get to logic and reason later on in life. And he also gives us the idea of the general will. The general will is this notion that government should do what is best for everybody at the same time. It's a pretty slippery notion because it's hard to do what everyone wants when there isn't just one mindset in the society. Even Rousseau admits that this is going to be tough to do. Beccaria is known for his ideas on crime and punishment. We should end punishments by torture. We should end capital punishment. He wants more civilized, more humane ways of treating people. I'm going to flip the page. Okay. The last couple points I'll make here about Mary Estelle. She said we should educate women so that they could be more informed about the society. Women in the salons generally served as hostesses. Sometimes they provided the questions, but they generally were not participants in the sense that they didn't get to dominate the debates. Okay. In the next section, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk about art, we'll talk about Eastern Europe, and also about the society. Hope you're enjoying these videos. Hope you're making good use of them. Work hard, ladies and gentlemen. Take care.